I'm not sure if these recordings will eventually turn into a podcast that I put out regularly or not. I decided that I wanted to try to touch on the experience that some people go through when they're just starting their journey, trying to find their path or figure out what direction they want to go in, where paganism or the occult or spirituality, whatever box you want to use or description there, it seems to me that people are quick to give some very generic advice and maybe some book recommendations, but I haven't come across a lot of material that touched on some of the difficulties that you face or that you could face. So it seemed to me that it was relevant to try to put something together about that. And I tried to do a blog post about it, and this is really just so broad that was kind of a failure. After about 5 hours, I decided I'm going to try something else, and so this seemed the next best thing. So yeah, it's a huge element, and I'm not really sure where to start, but um, the image that comes to mind is this notion of going to the grocery store, only it turns out that this grocery store is a mile wide. So really, it's this feeling that you're faced with thousands of choices, and being someone new, you don't even know what direction to go in. If you haven't done any kind of prep work, you may not even know what direction you lean toward or really what you're interested in, beyond the fact that you're looking for some kind of spiritual or religious practice that isn't, something from the mainstream. So, not to say that paganism and or Wicca or some of these other things aren't quote unquote mainstream. It's all opinionated. That's semantics, and I'm not going there. Um, but yeah, you're in this grocery store. You're seeing all these items. Let's say you're looking at a shelf or shelves that has cereal. If you don't have any experience in that, then you don't know anything about the texture of cereal or the flavors, much less nutritional values. So making that choice of, oh, I'm going to explore Druidism or whatever, I mean, you don't know that you're going to be into that because you don't know anything about it at all. I mean, it's almost like everything is gray. So the rambling point I'm trying to hit on here to begin with is that when you start, you're faced with so many choices. There's so much out there now. I mean, you've got like fluffy bunny, mushroom princess, Wicca. It's just like really bizarre. All the things that are out there. Not to say that that might not be cool. Maybe if that's how you classify yourself, but it's a lot to sort through. So on that note, yeah, the first little bit I would suggest try to get an idea of what it is you want. Are you looking for something that does contain a level of interaction with a god or a goddess or an entity or a spirit or whatever? Or are you simply looking for some kind of practical way, to do ritual or to cause an effect or change either in your own reality or inside yourself? I mean, there's some sort of core tenets that you can sketch out and say, well, I think at the very least that this interests me. So you can take those and sort of use them as some magnets to sort of steer your compass. Um, but yeah, I mean, it gets deeper than that. I also Another big push for me to make this recording is that I came across this blog post. This has been a couple days ago. Um, where this girl was sort of rehashing some of this and she was asking for advice. So, as I said, I did start my own blog post in reply, and I'm going to touch on that. Let me start by reading some of the questions that she put in her post. So she says, I'm a doubter. I go through the motions as best I can, but I generally worry sometimes that when I ask the gods for aid, there's not actually anything there to listen. She says, I have a lot of trouble feeling any sort of spiritual connection to the deities I try to work with. I don't know if I'm just not working with the right ones or if the problem is my creeping doubt, my lack of quote unquote true faith. And the last thing that I put there, she also says, I constantly feel like I'm doing it wrong somehow, in quotations. And from my own past experience, I think everything that she said is relevant, and I would almost go as far as to say that it's kind of common. Like I would say, a lot of people with no experience, when they start, they run into those sorts of things. And yeah, it's complicated and messy, and it's hard to sit down and try to dissect all that. So, in this blog post that I'm talking about, that I was writing, I think kind of at the heart of her questions, it's like you get some books and you read some of the subject matter to try to get an idea, and then more than likely you're going to go out in the wilderness or in your bedroom or wherever. Like you're going to try to do some little rituals or say some prayers, and you're going to try to connect to something. As I said, a spirit, a god, a goddess, like whatever that might be. Um, and you may have no success, or you might not sense something, like the breeze stirring, or your lights may not flicker. There may be no sign whatsoever that anything that you did was relevant or that you caused any change. And so you're kind of left, if that occurs, you're left with this feeling of defeat. And then there are the questions. What did I do wrong? How am I screwing up here? What can I do to fix this, etc. So ultimately, it takes you to this crossroads, and so I wrote down here three, like A, B, and C. So A, you've got this option of giving up. Like go do something else, whether it's bird watching or you're going to crochet or maybe learn to paint, like whatever. You just set it aside and say, this isn't for me, or it's not going to work for me, so I'm done. Like that's an option. For B, you've got continue forward stubbornly, quote unquote, going through the motions while carrying around all of this doubt from the initial experience where nothing happened. And if you don't change that approach, you're very likely not going to have any different results. So there's some redundancy there, I think. And then C, which I think is, in my opinion, the best alternative here, is to choose to try to understand the dilemma that you're facing and explore ways of discovering or creating a resolution that helps you move forward. Um, in that, in and of itself, like facing it and then sitting down and deconstructing the whole thing, it's complicated. It's not light. So inherently there, I think you have to ask yourself this question: why am I drawn to want to learn about this or experience it? And how meaningful or how important is this to me? Am I willing to really invest a lot of work, time, energy, thought, feeling, everything? Like am I really willing to go above and beyond to acquire, whatever it is, like my goal? Um, and I think if there's some uncertainty there, maybe you should take a step back, because there again, at least in my own experience, it's not something to take lightly. And I think I hate to use the word success because that has its own semantics, but what else is there? Your own success depends a lot on the effort that you invest, your willingness. That's where also your awareness, like, whether or not you're paying attention to it and whether or not you're willing to get into the complexity. So the questions that she posted, some of them deal with faith and belief. There again, it's another thing that's really broad. It would take a lot of time to go through all of that. So I think with this recording, we're just gonna hang out on the fringe of it. I do think it's important to mention this though. For a lot of us, I'll at least speak for me. Like I'm coming from a background where, as a little kid and as a teenager, I was introduced to Christianity here in the South. Particularly, it was, Baptist. It was the King James version of the Bible. So if that is in any way, shape, or form related to where you're coming from, I think somewhere in your brain there are these subconscious, preconceived notions of what a deity is, because in the King James version of the Bible, you get this view of God as being this all powerful entity that's everywhere all the time. And because of some things that happen in the Bible, which I don't need to get into, under certain circumstances, if you're quote unquote saved or whatever, like you may have this card, and that means God loves you. And no matter what you do or whatever, if you pray and you're like very genuine and devoted, then He's going to help you out. Like He's going to be there as sort of this shepherd and guardian. And so, kind of the point of that ramble is that if you're not careful, you will carry that preconceived notion into your now exploration of paganism and these other deities that may or may not fit, in that sort of scheme that you created in your mind of, oh, this is what a god is. Um, so I think that's a big fault and a big error right off the bat. Like, try to avoid that. Um, let's see. Two, I don't want to go too far into going on and on about the Bible, but I think this is another thing that's relevant. There, like, especially in the Old Testament, there's this sort of uh, formulaic interaction and exchange between people and God. Like God shows up, He talks to people, like there's real dialogue from this divine entity force thing that's outside of yourself who is speaking to you, or there are angels that show up that give quote unquote, the message of the word of God, or, it's a thing. So there too, that's another thing, like if you have some kind of preconceived notion that when you get into paganism, you're going to go out in the forest and, some deity is going to appear in these glowing robes and like give you wisdom that may or may not happen. Maybe you're involved in some traditional school where those types of manifestations occur. I'm not saying they do or they don't. I'm just saying I don't know. But I'm trying to say don't bank on that. And maybe when you start this, don't go in with those kinds of expectations. I think that you should be really happy if you feel a sudden like change in the breeze. Um, the post I was talking about a while ago, to be sort of redundant and cyclic. I can't share all of it, so, but anyway, from reading her post, like I got this impression that she had always sort of approached the work that she did from this place of kind of doubt. And while I'm not saying that doubt isn't like relevant or useful, or meaningful, but I am saying I think sometimes you can get in your own way. Um, if you do experience, quote unquote, a phantom draft, and then you say to yourself, oh, well, there must have been a shift in the weather outside, and perhaps the window was cracked, like 4 inches. So that was obviously what it was, and it wasn't anything, that I did, or like it wasn't some kind of message, or if you're completely dismissive of your experiences because a part of your psyche is closed off to them, then you're just going to get in this redundant cycle of doing things and not sensing these things that you want to sense and then thinking that you're a failure, but you're kind of already deciding that you're a failure if you view it that way. Now, I'm not saying that you should interpret, like a creak in the floorboard as a certain thing, because there again, you don't know. I mean, I think that really comes down to repetition and dedication and networking and talking with other people, listening to and learning from their experiences. Um, for me, that's what I find most meaningful. Um, I can get on YouTube and watch a video, and someone may talk about their experiences with connecting to a certain god or goddess or the divine, or they've, seen a spirit, or they had some kind of encounter. They may or may not be telling the truth. So that's another thing set to the side. But if I feel like that, I think they're telling the truth, then I can kind of take something from that. I can find some value there. Um, so yeah, preconceived notions and high expectations, really bad idea probably when you're just starting out, at least. Um, that's not to say that some people don't start walking their path, and maybe they're a natural and they're able to manifest their will, so they can sit down and do a spell with a like a candle and a chant, and then the next day, they get a lottery ticket and they win, say, $100,000 or whatever. Like maybe that's possible. I don't know if somebody's done that, but I don't think it's typical. I think if it was, there'd be a lot more rock stars and movie stars and billionaires in the world. Um, so yeah, in my mind, just as a beginner to some degree, myself, I don't think that's very likely or probable. Two, that touches on that whole mess of how much your own thoughts impact what you do and what you're able to perceive. Um, and there's another level there because I really do think that for most of us, our perceptions are extremely limited for various factors. That could be a whole recording in and of itself. But it feeds back to what I was talking about a minute ago about, like not expecting some deity to manifest, in front of you. It may simply be that throughout the course of your life, you haven't conditioned your senses and your mind to be open to experiencing that sort of event. So maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to look into some of those topics that touch on raising or altering your awareness. Now, I'm not saying run out and take some mushrooms. I'm certainly not advising that. And if you go and do that, and then you say, "Oh, you mentioned it in your little recording podcast," that's on you. Like that's your shit. I'm not. Don't do that unless you choose to. I mean, you have free will, so walk your own path. But I think personally, I think the bulk of accounts that you can find online and in books and journals and here and there of people who have experienced things beyond them, you could call extraordinary or whatever. Like all those people didn't take mushrooms. I mean, I think there are other ways to access that without using drugs. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, I think maybe make a sticky note or like pin that somewhere. If you do a lot of reading and you try to do a ritual and you've done it time and time again, say you've done it 20 or 100 times, like days in a row or whatever. Like if you're not having any success, be open to trying different things. Maybe you need to explore changing your awareness through drumming or trance or meditation or I mean, you could research psychic abilities. There are a slew of videos on YouTube, quote unquote, about like activating your third eye, and I read books on it. 20 years ago when I first started looking at and into this subject matter, I think I owned all the hokey books that there were, and probably some that were worthwhile to read. But maybe it's fair to say that I lacked the comprehension, to invest in it at that time or to understand it. So, but yeah, I'm just kind of saying that there are options, and if you keep running into obstacles and having problems, be open to changing your approach. And this is a good point. This is a good like moment in this long recording to mention YouTube. So far, I have found YouTube to be, I have to say now at this stage, a useful kind of reference thing. When I first started off using YouTube to try to find out more about paganism and Wicca and all this crap, Um, not to say that it's crap, I just threw that in there, but it, the first few videos that I watched, I was kind of like, well, I read that a long time ago, and I can see where you're coming from, but I don't know that it resonates with me personally. And I think there's a lot of that on there, at least for me. And then I came across someone on YouTube, and I watched some of her videos, and so far there's been like a 98%. Either she's saying something that I agree with, something that I already knew or thought, or it's something that I didn't know, but when I look at it, I say that makes sense. Like I can see where you're coming from. So yeah, YouTube. This part of this ramble, YouTube. So for me, has been useful. Um, where was I going with that? I know it was something about her and what was it? Yeah, okay. So another element of that example of reading and doing the ritual and trying to contact some deity. Um, this person that I'm talking about, her name is Thorn, and I'll link to her YouTube thing. You can go there and check it out. But she mentions in one of her videos about her own experiences with working with both. I think she mentions one or two goddesses, I want to say, that she works with, and some other form of entity or spirit. We don't need to get into the semantics of that. But anyway, basically, she says, how do I word that to you? For her, she views these different goddesses as their own thing. Like it's a separate entity, with, you could say, a unique mind or a unique being or personality or whatever. And because of that, she doesn't approach it in a generic way of saying, "Oh, I'm going to do the same ritual every time with every goddess that I work with, and they're going to be open to that." Her view is that you need to do research, like serious research, about whatever deity or spirit that you want to contact or work with, and approach it in that way. As if to say, okay, if I'm going to contact, let me think of an example. Venus, we'll say that. If I'm going to contact Venus, or Zeus for that matter, like maybe I should sort of really study, try to figure out what the Greeks did, how they interacted in the past with these deities. Find out about the culture, the land. I mean, maybe go there. Like, there's just so much that you can do, but it's coming from the context of this deity sort of exists, or it was, recorded in history via these people in this place on this continent, like in these conditions. And so maybe that's something that you should take into consideration, rather than just trying to approach it in a very generic way of, oh, well, this thing's out there, and now that I know this one ritual that I read in this book, I'm going to use it as a telephone, and they should answer when I call. I think that's another part of it too. Harkening back to what I said about what you can read in the Bible, particularly in the King James version, and I don't know how different it is in other translations. There, you're kind of told, like, no matter where you are, what's going on, all you have to do is pray, and God is there, and He hears you, and like He gets it, so you can have this meaningful connection. But for me personally, particularly where paganism, and the occult and some other stuff is concerned, I don't believe that's necessarily true. Now, I'm not saying that I think the entities aren't there, or that they can or can't perceive what's going on with you. Maybe they just aren't interested in working with you, or maybe they're busy, or like, there are a lot of possibilities there in that space. So yeah, long ramble. Um, put some time and energy and effort into considering, as I said before, your approach. And don't, unless you want to give up, don't allow yourself to be discouraged when things don't work out the way you had wanted them to. Another thing that girl touched on in her post was the whole part about, like, you will have these questions of, am I doing this right? Like, I read it in the book, maybe I memorized it, so I kind of really know what they're saying. And I've tried it. Like, I've gone out and I've done, these gestures, or I've tried to visualize and cast a circle. I've tried to call the elements, or, there are things in there, practices. But if you don't have the practice, and you don't have a certain level of confidence of saying, I know I did that right in this way, then you're sort of left with this feeling like, oh shit, maybe I messed up on this pronunciation, or maybe these are the causes of why it didn't work. Um, I wanted to touch on that because I think this is another thing that Thorne mentions in one of her videos, and it's in a sort of different context, but I think it's really great advice. One of the things she says is, go the extra mile. Like, if you're really interested in this subject matter, don't look at it and say, like, you're going to hear people on YouTube and in books and in certain forums and places, and they're going to say to you, it's great to be a solitary. You can do your own thing, and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying that there aren't good points to being, a solitary practitioner. Meaning working just by yourself. On the same hand, I think if you put yourself in a position where you can at least network or talk or discuss what you're going through or what you're interested in with someone else, then you're given a different perspective. And particularly if you've been trying and failing or having problems, if you've got someone there that you can reach out to and say, hey, I've done A, B, and Z or whatever, and I'm trying to get to C, but it's not happening. Time and time again, it's not happening. What advice can you lend? So Thorne's suggestion is, go to an open circle or go to a pagan event, whatever you can find where there are other pagans or other practitioners, like go. And one of the things that she stresses is what you'll find when you start down that idea is there'll be an event, and it may be like some druids are going to meet somewhere at a coffee shop. Well, you may think inherently in your brain, I'm not really interested in druidism. I don't want to be super connected to plants or, and I'm not saying that's all that druids do. I'm just using that as an example here. But you may have a kind of biased view toward someone who calls himself a druid. So you may look at that and say, well, that's not interesting to me, so I'm not going to go. But I think I think that's kind of a biased and possibly poor decision because just because that person practices druidism, it doesn't mean that they can't teach you something about entering into a trance or trying to do some shamanistic work or raising energy or whatever. Like people are people, and they're not just one thing in a box. So yeah, I think that there is opportunity to learn from other people if you open yourself up to that. And I personally, Thorne says it in her video, I think that this is true as far as like go meet people in person and sort of have that exchange. But if for some reason you think that's a terrible idea or a bad idea, there are other avenues there. It's been my experience so far that a lot of the people on places like YouTube who post these videos, if you leave them a respectful comment and you ask a question or you're engaged with them, a lot of times they'll respond. I mean, you can have some dialogue there if you don't want to go and hang out in person or, if you have some bias toward that. So that's another thing to consider. Let's see what else we've got. I think that kind of really rounds a lot of this out. Hopefully, this ramble wasn't way too scattered. Like I said, struggled today trying to write the journal entry or the blog post, and it wasn't coming together because all of this is so complex and there's such a depth to it. Let me see how long this is run. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop this now. I feel, I mean, there may be other parts to this because I'm sure after listening to it in retrospect and with reflection, I'll be like, damn, I really wanted to go into that. I didn't share this or this or this. So, but yeah, this may be the first recording. So I hope that if you're a beginner, you're just sort of getting into this stuff, I hope that you found something useful here. I will link, like I said, to Thorne's videos. She also does a blog. I haven't read a lot of her entries, but I kind of am going to assume that they're probably as interesting as the videos. So I'll try to link to that as well, and I'll link to the first post, which I did yesterday. That's just kind of like a beginner, but it gives you some background on me. That's why I didn't go into that in the recording. It seemed redundant, if I'm going to link to the post, to hash through that again. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I hope all of you are well, and I'll talk to you later.